The first time Captain Ryan Hawley saw the alien princess, she was standing in the middle of a burning courtyard, her golden armor glowing against the flames. Around her, the screams of her people echoed as enemy soldiers stormed the gates. She looked too calm for someone watching her world fall apart. But when her eyes locked on him, desperation replaced her composure. Ryan had been sent as part of a peacekeeping mission to a distant star system. They were told it was a ceremonial visit. Nothing more. The moment his shuttle touched down, alarms screamed through the palace. The enemy fleet had arrived early, firing without warning. He and his small squad fought their way through chaos, trying to reach the diplomatic wing. That was when he saw her, the last princess of the Verelian Empire, cornered by soldiers in black armor. She moved like a beam of light in the smoke, her silver-white hair catching the fire's reflection. When the first soldier reached for her, she drew a short golden blade and struck with precision. Ryan was too far to help in time, but she held them off long enough for him to reach her side. Without hesitation, he fired, dropping 2 enemies before they could touch her. She looked at him like he was something she had been waiting for her entire life. Her lips parted, but the words she spoke were not a thank you. "Human, I'll bear you strong offspring if you save my empire." Ryan froze, his mind trying to process if he had heard her correctly. In the middle of this burning ruin, she was offering him something he could not even begin to understand. But the way she said it was not seduction, it was a treaty. A promise and a command all at once. Your empire has soldiers. Ours is dying. If you help me survive this day, I will bind my bloodline to yours, she continued. Her golden eyes were steady, unshaken by the chaos around them. The ground shook as another blast hit the palace walls, sending dust and fire through the air. Ryan didn't have time to ask why she thought he could save her. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the western gate, where his squad was holding the line. The enemy was relentless. Verelian guards were falling fast, their ornate armor no match for the black-clad invaders' brutal weapons. Ryan's team was running low on ammunition, and the comms were filled with calls for retreat. But retreat meant leaving her here. And somehow, he knew that was not an option. Not because of her strange promise, but because she was the last symbol of hope these people had. Without her, the Verelian Empire would die before the sun set. They ducked behind a shattered wall, as a barrage of plasma fire tore through the courtyard. The princess knelt beside him, her breathing quick but controlled. "I can get us to the starport," she said. "But you must trust me. My people have tunnels beneath the city. The enemy does not know them." Ryan glanced at the flames closing in and then at her determined face. It was not a hard choice. "Lead the way," he replied, and they moved. The tunnels were dark, lit only by faint blue crystals embedded in the walls. The air smelled of dust and ancient stone. Ryan could hear distant battles echoing through the ground, a reminder that the fight was far from over. The princess walked ahead with surprising speed, her golden armor whispering against the narrow passage. She spoke little, but when she did, it was with certainty, as if every step they took was part of a plan she had been holding for years. When they emerged near the starport, Ryan saw the reality of the war. The enemy fleet's shadow covered the sky, massive ships blocking out the sun. The few Verelian fighters left were hopelessly outnumbered. Yet the princess did not hesitate. She looked up at the burning heavens, then back at him. "If we get to my flagship, we can turn this," she said. Ryan stared at her for a moment, then nodded. He didn't know if she could truly save her empire, but he knew one thing: he was going to try. The starport was a battlefield in itself. Shattered ships lay scattered across the landing pads, their twisted metal still glowing from recent blasts. Enemy soldiers were swarming between the wrecks, cutting down any defenders who dared resist. Ryan kept low, guiding the princess behind debris while his rifle barked short, controlled bursts. He could feel the heat of the fires licking the air. Around them, the sound of distant screams blending into the chaos like an endless storm. The princess moved with surprising agility, despite the weight of her ornate armor. Her golden hair streamed behind her as she ducked and weaved through cover. When an enemy soldier rounded a corner ahead, she was faster than Ryan. Her blade flashed, clean and sharp, dropping the threat before he could raise his weapon. Ryan realized then that she was no helpless royal. She was a warrior, and her calm expression in the burning courtyard had been born of experience, not ignorance. They reached the edge of the docking bay where the princess's flagship should have been. Instead, only wreckage remained. The massive ship had been destroyed in the opening salvo, its once glorious frame now a smoking ruin. The princess stopped, her golden eyes fixed on the destruction. For a brief moment, Ryan saw something break in her. But she straightened, turning to face him with the same fierce determination as before. "We have one chance left," she said. "The royal escort vessel. If it still flies, we can regroup with the outer fleet." Ryan scanned the skies, spotting the smaller craft across the bay. It was under heavy guard, with at least 20 enemy soldiers positioned between them and the ramp. The open ground offered no cover, and Ryan knew they would be cut down if they tried a straight run. He turned to her. "We need a distraction." She tilted her head, a faint smirk forming. "Then we give them one." Before he could stop her, she stood tall, her golden armor catching the light, and shouted in her native tongue. Every enemy soldier in the area turned toward her. Ryan's instincts kicked in. While their attention was on her, he sprinted along the outer wall, picking off guards from the flank. Plasma fire erupted toward the princess, but she moved with lethal precision, her blade deflecting shots while she closed the distance on the nearest attackers. Ryan took advantage of the chaos, dropping 2 more enemies before leaping behind a cargo crate. The plan was working, but they were running out of time. More soldiers were pouring in from the far side of the bay. With a burst of speed, Ryan reached the boarding ramp. He fired at the control panel, forcing it open. "Get in!" he shouted. The princess didn't hesitate, cutting through the last of the soldiers in her way before sprinting aboard. Ryan followed, slamming the hatch closed just as a barrage of fire hit the side of the ship. The deck vibrated under their feet as the engines roared to life. Ryan moved to the co-pilot's seat while the princess took the controls. "Hold on," she said, her hand steady on the flight yoke. The ship lifted, rising above the burning city. Below them, the palace and surrounding districts were shrouded in black smoke. Enemy fighters broke formation to intercept, their sleek forms cutting through the haze. Ryan gritted his teeth as the princess angled the ship sharply, weaving through incoming fire. The hull shook, alarms blaring, but her focus never wavered. "If we can reach the jump gate, we can escape to the outer colonies," she said. Ryan wasn't sure if the colonies would be any safer, but it was their only chance. As they neared the city's edge, a massive shadow passed over them. Ryan looked up to see one of the enemy capital ships moving into position, its weapons glowing. "They're going to fire," he shouted. The princess's eyes narrowed. She pulled the ship into a dive, skimming just above the rooftops as a beam of energy tore through the sky where they had been. The shockwave rattled the cabin, but they were still alive. "That was close," Ryan muttered. The princess didn't reply. Her attention was fixed on the horizon, where the faint shimmer of the jump gate was coming into view. Ryan checked the scanners. Enemy fighters were still on their tail, gaining speed. "We're not going to make it without losing them," he said. The princess's gaze flicked to him, then to the weapons console. "Then we turn and fight." Ryan stared at her, realizing she wasn't just trying to survive. She was trying to win. Against all odds, against the destruction of her home. She still carried the fire of a ruler unwilling to surrender. And in that moment, Ryan knew he would follow her into any battle. The princess's command to turn and fight was not spoken in desperation. It was the voice of someone who had led warriors before. Ryan quickly strapped himself into the weapons station, scanning the enemy signatures closing in. The targeting systems locked onto the first fighter, and his fingers squeezed the trigger. Twin bursts of plasma fire shot from the ship's cannons, catching the attacker mid-turn and sending it spinning into a nearby building. The enemy squadron responded immediately, breaking into two wings to encircle them. Ryan shifted fire, taking out another ship before they could close the gap. The princess maneuvered with sharp, controlled movements, throwing off the enemy's aim while keeping them close enough for Ryan to hit. Each time the ship shook under enemy fire, Ryan felt the urgency rise. They couldn't keep this up forever. Yet the look on her face told him she had a destination in mind beyond the jump gate. A warning tone blared as an enemy missile locked. On Ryan swiveled the turret, firing at the incoming threat. The missile exploded in a flash of light, the shockwave rattling the hull. "Nice shot," the princess said, without looking away from the controls. Her hands moved with confidence, pulling the ship into a spiral that forced two fighters into each other's path. The resulting collision lit the sky with fire, and for a moment, Ryan felt the tide shift in their favor. But the enemy was not retreating. More fighters poured in from the capital ship, determined to cut them down before they reached the gate. The princess's jaw tightened. "We need to break their will," she said. Ryan understood. They needed more than escape. They needed to make the enemy fear pursuit. He scanned the readouts and found a weakness in the capital ship's forward shield grid. If they struck it, even briefly, the message would be clear. He told her his plan, and she agreed without hesitation. She angled the ship toward the massive vessel, engines roaring as they skimmed over rooftops. Enemy fighters scrambled to block them, but Ryan's aim was steady. One by one, he tore through their formation, clearing the path ahead. The capital ship loomed larger with every second, its black hull bristling with weapons. Ryan's heart pounded as they closed in. "Ready," he said, locking onto the weak point. The princess pulled them into firing range, and he unleashed everything the cannons could give. The shield grid flared and shattered under the concentrated assault. Energy rippled across the capital ship's surface, and one of its main gun arrays went dark. Ryan didn't wait to see the damage fully settle. "Now pull away," he called. The princess banked hard, the smaller escort ship darting out of the capital ship's engagement zone before the enemy could retaliate. Behind them, chaos rippled through the pursuing fighters. Their perfect formation broke, hesitation creeping into their movements. They made for the jump gate at full speed. The shimmering vortex grew larger, its light reflecting off the ship's hull. Ryan could feel the relief in the air, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they were not safe yet. The enemy still had enough ships to chase them through, if they wished. The princess seemed to sense this as well. "Once we jump, the war does not end," she said. "But this will give us the ground to stand again." The gate's pull took hold, and the stars outside stretched into streaks of light. In an instant, the burning world behind them was gone. They emerged into the cold expanse of deep space, where a small cluster of ships waited. Ryan recognized the markings of Varelian defense craft, though they were few in number. The princess straightened in her seat, her voice calm yet commanding as she hailed them. "This is Princess Serenia of the Varelian Empire. Prepare to regroup and strike back." The ships responded with a chorus of acknowledgments. Ryan leaned back, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The battle for her world had only just begun, but in this moment, they had escaped the jaws of certain defeat. He turned to look at her, this fierce, unshaken woman who had promised him more than survival. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he had stepped into something far greater than just another mission. The scattered Varelian ships formed a rough ring around the escort vessel as it slowed from the jump. Their hulls were scarred, their engines tired, but the sight of the princess's transponder seemed to lift them. Ryan watched crew members on nearby bridges straighten to attention, hands moving faster at their stations. The princess stood from the pilot chair and faced the forward screen, shoulders square and voice steady as she addressed every ship on the encrypted channel. "Commanders, we have survived the first assault, but survival is not victory. The enemy believes our courage is broken. They are wrong." Her words were simple and clear, hitting with the weight of a vow. Ryan glanced at her and saw no tremor in her posture. He imagined the fear drumming inside her like it drummed inside him, then realized she did not let fear choose her actions. She asked for a status report, listened, and began assigning tasks without delay. A frigate captain reported a wounded crew and half a magazine of missiles. A corvette had lost shields, but still carried a functional drone bay. A medical tender sheltered civilians and needed protection. The princess laid out a plan in short steps. They would repair while moving. They would strike only to disrupt. They would refuse any fight that cost them more than it cost the enemy. She turned to Ryan and asked for human tactics that favored small numbers against a larger force. Ryan pulled up a map of the system and pointed to 3 gas-rich moons orbiting a pale giant. Their magnetic fields were harsh and irregular. He explained that fighters relying on tight formations would lose coordination inside those fields. If they planted decoys and used timed flares, they could lure patrols into the turbulence, pick them off, and vanish. The princess listened closely, then gave the order to gather fuel and scrap to fabricate the decoys. The fleet shifted course. With quiet purpose, inside the hangar, Ryan worked with Varelian engineers. Their tools looked elegant, but functioned like his old field kit. He sliced salvage into wing shapes, mounted heat cores, and adjusted emitters until each decoy looked like a fleeing shuttle to simple scanners. The princess joined them without ceremony, sleeves rolled, palms smudged by carbon. She fastened a brace to a drone and asked if the angle would fool human hardware. Ryan smiled and said it would fool his on a bad day, which was the point. Before deployment, the princess asked for a private moment with Ryan near the observation blister. The stars poured through the glass in silent rivers. She spoke softly about her earlier promise, saying it came from an ancient treaty word that meant joining bloodlines to join futures. She said she had offered it because she believed he would not take advantage of it. She said the vow was not a reward, but a burden shared. Ryan met her gaze and said he was here to save lives first. The first raid began under the shadow of the blue giant. Decoys streaked through the magnetized clouds, blinking like wounded birds. Enemy scouts broke formation to chase the easy kills. Ryan and the princess rode in a corvette that slid in behind the confusion. He called targets and the gunners fired once, then twice, then vanished into the haze. 3 enemy fighters spun out with dead engines. The rest regrouped too late, and by then the Varelian ships were already shifting to a new pocket of cover. On the second pass, the enemy adapted. They sent fewer scouts and linked them with drones that corrected drift. The princess adjusted immediately, ordering the fleet to fire grapnels into an asteroid field and tow a chain of rocks into the turbulence. When the scouts arrived, the chain snapped and scattered boulders into their path. Sensors flashed with false collisions while Ryan's corvette struck from the dark side of a moon. 2 more fighters fell, and a third fled toward its carrier. With a smoking tail, a message cut through the battle net from an encrypted source claiming to be a Varelian admiral. It warned that the outer colony garrison had been offered surrender terms, and that some commanders were ready to accept. The princess listened in silence, then asked for a narrow beam link to the garrison. Her face hardened when the channel opened, and revealed a weary officer speaking of hopeless arithmetic. She did not shout. She told him numbers only decide battles when hearts allow it. She promised reinforcements within 1 orbit and ordered him to hold the last shield wall until her banner arrived. The promise to reinforce the outer colony became the pulse of the fleet. Every crew member, from the youngest deckhand to the most seasoned captain, moved with new urgency. Repairs were rushed, weapons recalibrated, and hull breaches sealed with whatever materials could be spared. The princess spent no time in her quarters. She walked the decks, speaking to crews, reminding them that the eyes of the last free Varelians were on them. Ryan noticed how every soldier stood taller after she passed, even if their armor still bore scorch marks from the last battle. They charted the fastest route to the colony, but speed alone would not be enough. The enemy controlled the main lanes, forcing the fleet to cut through asteroid belts and debris fields. The risk was high, yet hesitation would cost lives at the colony. Ryan stood beside the navigation officer, pointing out routes where human starships might pass undetected. The princess approved his suggestions and gave the order to proceed. The ship's engines groaned as they pushed to maximum safe thrust. Days blurred into a rhythm of readiness. Sleep was scarce, and every hour brought news of enemy movements. Scouts reported that the opposing fleet was massing near the colony's orbit, their numbers swelling with reinforcements. Ryan reviewed combat logs, studying patterns in their attacks. The princess joined him in the war room, her gaze scanning the holographic map. "They will expect us to break through their center," she said. Ryan nodded and suggested a feint on the flank, using the smallest ships as bait while the main force slipped past. The plan was risky. If the bait ships were caught too soon, the main fleet would be trapped between enemy wings. But the princess agreed was their best chance. She called the captains together via secure channel, laying out the maneuver in precise detail. Ryan watched her speak, noting how she gave each commander a role that fit their ship's strengths. When doubts arose, she answered them with calm logic, reminding them that hesitation would hand the colony to the enemy without a fight. As the fleet neared the final jump, tension settled over the decks like a weight. The crews checked and rechecked their stations. Engineers whispered to their machines, coaxing them to hold together for just one more battle. Ryan stood in the hangar with the pilots of the bait squadron, walking them through human dogfighting techniques. Some smiled at the strange tactics, others frowned at the risks, but all saluted him before heading to their fighters. The princess arrived moments later, offering them a single nod of approval. The jump dropped them into a sky filled with fire. The colony's outer defenses were collapsing, energy shields flickering as enemy bombardments tore through the perimeter. Civilian transports fled in all directions, some caught in crossfire and burning as they fell toward the planet below. Ryan's gut tightened at the sight, but there was no time for grief. The bait squadron dove into the fray, weaving between the enemy's forward lines. Plasma trails lit their path, drawing the enemy's attention exactly as planned. The princess's voice rang over the comms, crisp and unshaken. "Main force, advance on Vector 39. Keep formation tight." Ryan monitored the sensors as their ships slipped along the enemy's weaker flank. For a moment, it seemed the enemy had taken the bait entirely. But then a cluster of interceptors broke away from the main pursuit, heading straight for the main fleet. Ryan's hands flew over the weapons console, locking onto the lead ship and firing until it disintegrated. The princess swung their vessel to shield a smaller corvette from the rest. The bait squadron was paying heavily for its role. Ryan saw two friendly fighters vanish from the board. The survivors pressed on, luring the enemy deeper into the trap. Meanwhile, the main fleet reached the colony's shield perimeter. The princess hailed the garrison commander, her voice carrying the weight of command. "We are here. Open a gap in the shield grid for our entry." The response came swiftly, the defensive wall parting just enough for the Varelian ships to slip through. Inside the shield, the scene was no less dire. The colony's surface burned in several districts, and medical shuttles darted between smoking towers. Ryan could see the relief in the faces of civilians watching their ships arrive. The princess wasted no time, ordering defensive formations and coordinating with ground forces. Her commands turned the chaos into a pattern, and for the first time. In days, the defenders began to push back. The colony's surviving guns roared to life, targeting the enemy's nearest capital ship. Ryan knew the fight was far from over. The enemy would regroup and press their attack harder than before. But for now, they had carved out a foothold where none had seemed possible. He glanced at the princess, who stood at the center of the bridge, eyes fixed on the tactical display. She had promised to save her empire, and each battle brought her closer to that vow. Ryan felt the same resolve burn in his chest, ready to see this war through to its end. The foothold at the colony allowed the fleet a brief window to breathe, but the enemy's next move came faster than anyone predicted. Long-range sensors picked up multiple capital ships jumping into the system, their approach vectors tightening around the planet like a noose. On the bridge, the atmosphere turned sharp with urgency. The princess studied the tactical display, her golden eyes narrowing as she issued orders to reposition the fleet between the colony and the incoming threat. Ryan checked the ammunition levels for the fleet and found them dangerously low. Every cannon shot would have to count, and every missile launch needed to cripple something important. He moved from station to station, speaking with gunners and officers, reinforcing the idea that precision would win this fight, not reckless. Fire! The princess overheard and nodded at his advice, adjusting the fire control orders to match. She reminded the fleet that the colony was the shield they could not allow to fall. The enemy arrived with the confidence of superior numbers. Their formation spread wide, attempting to surround the defenders. The princess anticipated the maneuver, directing her smaller ships to weave through the gaps in the enemy's line. Ryan could see the confusion this caused on the tactical map. Enemy squadrons turning back and forth in disarray. The Varelians hit hard in these moments, striking engines and weapon mounts before fading away. It was a game of speed and nerve, when the princess seemed born to play. Still, the enemy pressed forward. The colony's shield began to flicker again under the concentrated bombardment. Ryan caught sight of civilian ships attempting to flee, some barely making it past the shield before being destroyed. His jaw tightened as another explosion lit the sky. The princess placed a hand on his shoulder, a wordless gesture that told him she felt the same anger. She gave the order to launch every available fighter to intercept the bombers, targeting the shield generators. The dogfights above the colony were fierce and close. Ryan watched from the gunnery screen as Varelian pilots flew like arrows, diving into enemy formations and scattering them with precise bursts. The princess's voiceover comms kept their focus, calm but commanding. Ryan targeted an approaching bomber, hitting it just as it lined up a shot on the shield array. The wreck tumbled into the upper atmosphere, breaking apart in a trail of fire. Around him, the crew cheered, but the battle was far from won. An enemy capital ship broke through the defensive perimeter, its guns trained directly on the colony. The princess made a choice that would decide the outcome of the fight. She ordered her own vessel, the last escort ship, to engage it head-on. Gasps rippled through the crew, but no one disobeyed. Ryan moved to the co-pilot's seat, strapping in as the engine screamed under the sudden acceleration. The enemy ship loomed ahead, its black hull blotting out the stars. They exchanged fire at point-blank range, energy blasts slamming into shields until they glowed white-hot. The princess maneuvered with impossible precision, sliding their ship just out of each killing strike. Ryan fired volley after volley into the enemy's weapon mounts, tearing away its forward guns one by one. The capital ship's return fire weakened, but its mass still pushed forward like a mountain sliding toward them. The princess aimed for its command tower, a strike that could cripple the entire vessel. The first hit cracked the armor, the second breached it entirely. Internal explosions rippled through the ship, visible even from their cockpit. Enemy fighters began to scatter, breaking formation as their flagship faltered. The princess didn't relent. She kept firing until the massive vessel drifted sideways, engines failing, hull venting atmosphere in great streams. The moment it began to fall out of orbit, a surge of cheers erupted across the Verelian channels, with their flagship gone. The enemy fleet began to withdraw. The remaining ships turned away from the colony, retreating toward the edge of the system. The princess ordered pursuit only to the limit of the outer defenses, unwilling to risk overextension. Ryan exhaled. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. The colony was safe for now, and the enemy had been dealt a blow they could not ignore. The victory felt hard-earned, carved from the edge of defeat. As the crew settled into post-battle routines, the princess stepped away from the command station and faced Ryan. Her expression was softer now, though her posture remained regal. "You have fought beside me through fire and death," she said quietly. "When I promised you a place in my future, it was not only for my sake but for the survival of my people. That future is closer now because of you." Ryan met her gaze, understanding the weight of what she meant and knowing the war was not yet over. The retreat of the enemy fleet gave the Verelian forces a rare opportunity to regroup, but it also brought new challenges. Damage reports flowed in from every ship, listing critical shortages in fuel, munitions, and medical supplies. The colony's people, though grateful, were exhausted from days of bombardment. The princess moved quickly, assigning repair crews and setting up distribution points for food and medicine. Ryan assisted in coordinating human-style triage systems, which sped up the treatment of the wounded and allowed more soldiers to return to duty sooner. As repairs continued, the princess called a council of her senior captains. Ryan attended as her tactical advisor, standing beside her at the center of the holotable. The enemy's withdrawal was only temporary. Scouts reported they were regrouping 2 systems away, gathering reinforcements for a decisive strike. The princess proposed something daring, meeting them before they could enter the colony's orbit again. Her captains exchanged uneasy glances, weighing the risk of leaving their defensive position. Ryan stepped forward and supported the plan, pointing out that a surprise offensive could cripple the enemy's momentum. The decision was made. The fleet would strike within 2 days. Until then, every ship had to be battle-ready. The colony's factories worked without pause, forging new armor plates and weapon components from salvaged wreckage. Civilians volunteered to carry supplies and assist repair crews. The princess walked among them daily, speaking words of encouragement that seemed to spark renewed strength. Ryan could see how deeply her people believed in her. She was more than a ruler, now she was the living symbol of their survival. In the hangar, Ryan worked with pilots on a new attack formation. Drawing on human aerial combat strategies, he designed a pattern of overlapping cover fire that allowed smaller ships to protect the larger ones while advancing. The princess observed silently from a balcony above, her golden eyes following every movement. When he finished, she descended and told the pilots that these maneuvers could decide the fate of the Empire. Her voice was steady, but there was a sharp edge of resolve in it. The night before the offensive, the princess invited Ryan to the observation deck. The stars beyond the glass shimmered in the quiet darkness, and for a rare moment, neither of them spoke of war. She told him stories of her childhood in the palace, of gardens that stretched into the sky, and festivals that lit the streets in gold. She said she wanted her people to know such peace again. Ryan promised he would fight to see it happen, and she simply nodded in acceptance of his vow. Dawn cycle came, and with it, the hum of readiness. The fleet formed up outside the colony's shield, engines burning bright. The princess stood at the front of the command bridge, her posture unshakable as she gave the order to advance. Ryan took his place at the weapons station, scanning the starfield ahead for signs of the enemy. The jump to the next system was swift, and when they emerged, the battlefield awaited. Enemy ships filled the void. arrayed in tight formation, confident. In their numbers, the Varelian fleet struck first. Long-range cannons fired in unison, breaking holes in the enemy's forward line. Rayan's targeting systems lit up as fighters streaked past, releasing bursts of plasma into the gaps. The princess maneuvered the escort ship with precision, placing them where they could strike hardest without drawing concentrated fire. Enemy return volleys shook the hull, but the crew held their ground. Ryan fired until his cannons overheated. Cooling them just long enough to fire again, the enemy attempted to flank, sending a wing of fast attack craft around the Varelian right side. Ryan spotted the move and called it out. The princess responded instantly, diverting a corvette squadron to intercept. The clash was brutal, ships darting and weaving in close quarters, but the Varelian corvettes emerged victorious, their guns cutting down the attackers before they could threaten the main fleet. The balance of the battle began to tip, and the enemy's once perfect formation started to unravel. As the lines broke, the princess ordered a full advance. Every ship surged forward, pressing the enemy into a tight pocket of space near an asteroid cluster. Ryan targeted the largest enemy cruiser, focusing fire on its engines. The cannons tore through the metal, leaving the ship adrift and vulnerable. Smaller Varelian ships swarmed it, delivering the final strikes that shattered its hull. Across the sound of victory cries filled the air, but the princess's voice cut through with a steady warning to hold position. The enemy's remaining forces attempted a desperate escape, scattering in all directions. The princess allowed only limited pursuit, conserving their strength for what lay ahead. Ryan sat back, his hands still gripping the controls, heart pounding with the rush of combat. They had won another battle, but both he and the princess knew the war's true climax was still to come. The survival of the Varelian Empire would depend on the choices they made in the next confrontation. The silence after the battle was heavy, but it carried the weight of opportunity. The enemy had been driven back again, and for the first time since the war began, the Varelian fleet held the advantage. On the bridge, the crew moved with quiet purpose, repairing systems and recalibrating weapons. The princess stood at the center, her eyes scanning the tactical reports. Ryan knew she was already planning the final strike that could end the war in their favor. Scouts reported that the enemy's remaining fleet had fallen back to a stronghold deep within their own territory. It was a fortified station orbiting a resource-rich planet, heavily armed and shielded. Attacking it would be dangerous, but if it fell, the enemy's war effort would collapse. The princess listened to the details in silence, then turned to Ryan. If we take this, my empire will have the breathing space it needs to rebuild. He understood the stakes and agreed it was the moment to commit. Preparations began immediately. Every ship in the fleet was inspected twice, every weapon cleaned and tested. The colony's factories worked without pause, producing ammunition, fuel cells, and armor plating. Civilians continued to volunteer for support roles, freeing trained soldiers for the front lines. The princess visited the hangars, offering a few words to each squadron. Ryan noticed how the crews responded to her presence with renewed energy. As if her belief in victory was contagious, the day of the assault arrived with the fleet gathered at the jump point. Ryan stood beside the princess on the command bridge, both of them watching the stars beyond the viewport. She spoke softly so only he could hear. When this ends, whatever the outcome, I will keep my promise to you. Not because I must, but because I choose to. He met her gaze and nodded, understanding that her words carried more than a personal vow. They were a bond between their peoples. The jump delivered them into the heart of enemy space. Alarms blared as defensive platforms locked onto their fleet. Enemy ships poured from the station like hornets from a nest, forming a wall of steel and fire. The princess wasted no time, ordering the fleet into an aggressive spearhead formation. Ryan manned the weapons, targeting the platforms with precise bursts. The opening exchange was brutal. the void filled with streaks of plasma and explosions that painted the darkness in gold and red. Varelian fighters surged ahead, weaving through enemy lines to strike at the station's shield generators. Ryan tracked their progress, firing on any interceptor that tried to stop them. The Princess maneuvered their ship into the thick of the fighting, placing them close enough to cover the fighters without exposing the entire fleet. The first generator fell, and a section of the station's shield flickered. Over the comms, the pilots' voices carried a surge of triumph that fueled the next wave of attacks. The enemy fought back with desperation. Heavy cruisers targeted the Varelian capital ships, forcing the fleet to split its fire. The Princess adjusted tactics instantly, sending smaller vessels to harass the cruisers while the main force continued hammering the station. Ryan disabled one cruiser's weapons, buying precious minutes for the assault teams. Another generator fell, and the shield weakened further. The station's hull was now vulnerable in key sectors, and the Princess ordered all ships to concentrate fire there. The final push was chaotic. Debris filled the space between the fleets, and sensor readings became unreliable. Ryan relied on visual targeting, locking onto the station's main reactor housing. Every shot brought fresh damage, tearing through the structure. Fighters delivered their payloads in tight sequences, and the reactor's containment field began to collapse. The explosion, when it came, lit the system brighter than the sun, sending shockwaves through the enemy formation and scattering what remained of their fleet. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of victory reports flooding the comms. The enemy stronghold was gone, their command structure shattered. Across the fleet, cheers rose from every deck. The Princess exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. She turned to Ryan, her golden eyes shining with something beyond triumph. "The Empire lives," she said, her voice steady. "And it will never forget who stood beside me when all seemed lost." In the days that followed, the fleet returned to the colony as heroes. The people lined the streets, throwing garlands and singing songs of victory. The Princess addressed the crowd from the palace steps, declaring a new era of unity between the Varelian Empire and humanity. Ryan stood at her side, not as an outsider, but as someone bound to their future by choice and by blood. The war was over, but the alliance they had forged would shape the stars for generations to come.